The first time I felt my own thoughts go quiet inside me, I was 23 years old, standing at the kitchen window of a house that had been built by my husband's father, watching the second frost arrive in a single night and finish what the first frost had only threatened. The tomato vines went black between sundown and breakfast. I remember the kettle behind me had begun to whistle and I did not turn around. I remember my hands were wet from rinsing a bowl, and the water on them had gone cold, and I had not noticed when. I remember a single crow on the fence post, and the fence post leaning the way it had leaned for 2 winters, and my husband's coat hanging on the peg by the door with the shape of his shoulders still in it. He had been gone an hour. The room behind me was warm. The room inside me was not. And I knew, the way Amish women always learn things, quietly, sideways, while doing something with their hands, that something in me had just stopped speaking, and that I had let it stop, and that I had been letting it stop for a long time. I want to tell you what happens to an Amish woman who learns to disappear inside her own body, and what it took to call myself back. My name is Hannah. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I tell the stories my community would not let me speak when I was still inside it, and where I try to give language to the things that were taught to me without words. I grew up Old Order Amish in Geauga County, Ohio, the cold belt north of Middlefield, where the snow comes early and stays late and the lanes are narrow between the fences. I was married at 19 and I left at 25. If you are new here, please subscribe and tap the bell, because these stories are quiet and the algorithm does not love quiet things, and I would like for you to be able to find me again. Tap the like button if you can. It costs you nothing and it helps another woman find this video tonight, sitting in her kitchen looking at her own window. And in the comments, before I keep going, I would like to ask you something. Have you ever stopped speaking inside yourself, not because you had nothing to say, but because you had learned what it cost to say it? Tell me where you were sitting when you noticed. I read every single one. I want to say something about the Ordnung before I tell you what happened, because if I do not, the rest of this will not make sense to anyone who did not grow up inside it. The Ordnung is the unwritten rule of a community. It is not printed in any book. There is no copy you can hold in your hand. It lives in the air between people, in the small turn of a bishop's head, in the way a mother does not answer a question. In the outside world, when something is wrong, you are taught to name it. In my community, when something is wrong, you are taught not to. The hierarchy is simple, and it is taught to you before you can read. God is at the top. Below God is the bishop. Below the bishop is your husband. Below your husband is you. Below you are your children. A wife submits, a husband leads, and the worst thing a woman can be is hochmut, proud, lifted up, separate, opinionated, full of self. The cardinal sin of an Amish woman is to have an inside that does not match the outside. The cardinal virtue is Gelassenheit, which is usually translated as yielding. But yielding is too gentle a word. What it really means is that you must learn to be soil. Soil does not argue with the plow. Soil does not refuse the seed. Soil does not ask what is being planted in it or why. Soil yields. And a wife is soil, and the field that does not yield is a judgment on the woman who tilled it. Everyone knows. No one says. This is the architecture I was raised inside, and the silence inside that architecture was load-bearing. If you took the silence out, the whole building would come down. My husband's name was Amish. He was 22 when we married, 2 years older than I was, and he had hands that were already older than the rest of him from working his father's dairy. We met at a church singing in the upper room of Mary Yoder's house the winter I was 17, and he did not speak to me that night, but he passed me a tin cup of cider without looking at me. And that, where I come from, is a sentence. We were married in late October, on a Thursday, because Thursdays were the right day for weddings. There were nearly 300 guests. The preaching went 4 hours. There was roast chicken and creamed celery and mashed potatoes and 7 kinds of pie. And my cousin Sarah cried into the dishwater when it was over because she said I looked too thin, and my mother told her to hush, because brides who look thin look obedient, and obedience is what a husband sees first. I want to be careful here. Amish was not a monster. He was not cruel. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, with the same hierarchy printed onto him as deep as it was printed onto me. and he loved me in the only way he had been taught a man could love a wife. That is the whole tragedy of what I am about to tell you. It is not a story about a bad man. It is a story about what good people do when the framework they were given is the mistake. Our first child came inside the first year. Our second, 15 months later. By the time I was 23, I had 2 children under 3, a kitchen that was never not warm, a husband who came in twice a day for meals and prayed at the head of the table, and a body that had been working a long time. And one Tuesday in September, when Amos came in from the barn and put his hand on the back of my neck the way he always did when he wanted me to know he would be coming to bed early, I said, without turning around, "Not tonight, Amos. I'm tired." That was the inciting transgression. 3 words. 1 sentence. That was the small, mundane thing that began everything else. He did not say anything. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He took his hand off the back of my neck, and he sat down at the table, and he ate the supper I had made him in complete silence. And he went out to the porch afterward to read the budget by the last of the daylight. And when he came in, he went up the stairs without looking at me. And the cold came in. That is the only way I know to describe it. The cold came in the way weather comes in. There was no shouting, there was no scene. There was only a slow, careful withdrawal of warmth from the room. The way you might bank a fire down for the night, only the fire was me, and the banking down went on for days. He did not speak to me on Wednesday. He did not speak to me on Thursday. On Friday, he said, "Pass the salt." And on Saturday, he said, "The bay mare needs her shoe looked at." And on Sunday at church, he sat on the men's bench and did not turn his head once. I waited for him to be angry. I waited for him to argue. I waited for anything at all. Nothing. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. Silence. And the silence was not empty. The silence was full of instruction. The silence was teaching me something. The silence was the lesson, and I was supposed to learn it without anyone ever having to say a word. On the 8th day, my mother came. She came on a Tuesday morning with a covered dish of apple butter and a piece of mending she said she had brought because she thought I might have time to look at it for her, which was a lie, because my mother had hands that could mend in the dark, and we both knew it, and we both did not say so. She sat at my kitchen table, and she watched me pour the coffee, and she watched me set out the cups, and she watched me sit down across from her, and then she said, looking at the apple butter and not at me, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes, Hannah." That was all. She drank her coffee. She asked after the children. She did not look at me once. And before she left, she put her hand briefly on top of mine, the way Amish women deliver warnings, and she said, "Your grandmother used to say that the field that does not yield is a judgment on the woman who tilled it. Think on it." And she walked out to her buggy, and I stood at the window and watched her go, and I understood that my mother had been sent, and that someone had spoken to her, and that someone had spoken to that someone, and that the whole quiet machinery of my community had already begun to turn, 8 days after 3 words at a kitchen sink. On the 11th day, Amos's sister Mary came by with a jar of chow chow and stayed 40 minutes and spoke of nothing but the weather and the upcoming wedding of a girl I barely knew. And as she stood at the door to leave, she said, almost as an afterthought, "Amos has been looking thin. Men feel things, Hannah. They just do not say so." And she was gone before I could answer, which is the point. You are never meant to answer. You are only meant to receive. On the 14th day, the bishop's wife came. She was a woman named Fanny, and she had a face like a closed envelope, and she stayed for an hour and a half, drinking coffee I had not offered to make, and that she had asked for in the soft, polite way that is not a request. She talked about her own daughters. She talked about how marriage was a discipline like any other, like learning to bake or learning to garden, and how the early years were the hardest, and how a wife who let pride into her bedroom let it into every room of the house after. She did not say my name. She did not say Amos's name. She did not say what she had come for. She did not have to. The whole house was cold by the time she left, and I stood at the door and watched her buggy go down the lane, and I felt, for the first time in my life, that I was being arranged, that something was being done to me by hands I could not see, and that those hands had been doing this for 200 years, to women whose names I would never know, in kitchens that looked exactly like mine. I want to pause here, because if you have stayed with me this long, thank you. These stories are not easy to tell, and they are not easy to hear. And I know some of you are hearing your own kitchens inside mine. If this is resonating with you, please consider subscribing. Tap the bell so the next one finds you. Leave a single word in the comments if a full sentence is too much tonight. Just a word, just to let me know you are there. I read every one of them, and I sit with them. And I want you to know that you are not alone in your kitchen tonight. The Lydia of my story was not named Lydia. Her name was Rebecca, and she was 68 years old. And she was the woman in our district who organized the quilting bees, and she had buried 3 children and 1 husband, and she had a face that had been weathered into something soft and unbreakable, the way old wood becomes when it has been rained on enough times. The quilting bee was held in her front room on the 3rd Thursday of every month, and on the 3rd Thursday of the month after the bishop's wife came, I went because not going would have been louder than going, and I sat at the frame between 2 women who would not meet my eyes, and I worked my needle in and out of a wedding ring quilt that was being made for a girl I did not know, and I did not speak for 2 hours. It was Rebecca who came around with the tea. She stood behind me with the kettle, and she leaned down and she filled my cup, and she did not look at me, and she said, very softly, almost into the steam, "They do not hit us here, Hannah. That is not our way. What they do is harder. They take the warmth out of the room, and they wait for you to ask them to put it back. And one day you do, and then you have taught them how to do it again." She straightened up. She moved on to the next woman. She filled her cup. She did not look back at me. And I sat at the quilting frame with the needle in my hand, and I felt something inside me, something that had been quiet for a long time, sit up. I went home that night, and I made supper, and I put the children to bed, and I sat at the kitchen table across from Amish, and he ate his pie, and he read his budget, and he did not look at me. And I did not look at him, and the kerosene lamp burned low between us, and I thought about Rebecca's words. They take the warmth out of the room, and they wait for you to ask them to put it back. And I understood, sitting there, that I had been about to ask, that I had been 3 days from asking, that I had been rehearsing, in the back of my head, a soft, small sentence that began with, "Amos, I'm sorry." And that the sentence had been forming in me without my permission, the way the cold had formed on the tomato vines the September before, between sundown and breakfast, without anyone asking it to. I did not say the sentence. I did not say it that night, or the next, or the night after that. I went back to my work. I baked, I washed, I gardened, I nursed the baby. I let Amos come back to me the way he wanted to come back to me, which was without ever having to acknowledge that he had gone. And the warmth returned to the room the way warmth returns to a room, slowly, in degrees, without comment, and from the outside, our house looked the same as it had always looked. Behind the prayer cap, though, something had shifted. I had begun to count. I do not know how to explain what I was counting. I was counting the times the cold came in. I was counting the small disagreements I did not voice. I was counting the flour I bought without asking, the seeds I planted in the wrong row, the songs I hummed under my breath that were not in the Ausbund. I was counting the questions I swallowed in church when the visiting minister said that a wife's no was the devil's first language. I was counting the times my own daughter, who was 3 by then, watched me lower my eyes at the table, and I was counting how quickly she learned to lower hers. That was the count that did it. That was the number I could not carry. The climax of my story is not a confrontation. There was no confrontation. The Amish do not give you a confrontation. They give you weather, and you stand in it, and you decide. Mine arrived on a morning in early April, the spring I was 25. I was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, and I had just pinned up the last of Amos's shirts, 6 of them, identical, broadcloth, the same shape his coat had hanging on the peg, and I stepped back, and I looked at the row of them, and I saw the row of my life. 6 shirts, 6 days. Sundays he wore the black one inside. I saw the next 40 years of shirts. I saw my daughter, at 20, pinning up a row of her husband's shirts. I saw her counting. I saw her not saying. And I felt, the way you know a season has changed without looking at the calendar, that I was going to leave. Not that day, not the next, but soon. And the deciding of it was so quiet that for a long moment I thought I had not decided anything at all. I will not tell you the story of the leaving today, because the leaving belongs to a different video, and it deserves its own air. I will tell you only that I had been saving egg money in a quart jar in the back of the loft of the small barn for almost 2 years by then, without knowing why I was saving it, and that I left on a Tuesday morning in early June with one suitcase and the egg jar and a Mennonite woman in town named Linda, who drove a maroon Buick and did not ask me a single question for the first 40 miles. I will tell you that I walked the half-mile to the phone shanty at the end of our lane in the dark, and that the gravel sounded loud under my shoes, and that I did not look back at the house, because I knew if I looked back, I would not keep walking. I will tell you that my children were asleep when I left, and that what I did that morning was the hardest thing I have ever done, and the most necessary. And that those two things, in my life, have almost always been the same thing. The aftermath was what you would expect, if you have heard these stories before. The first letter I wrote home came back unopened. The second came back unopened. The third I did not send. I called the phone shanty at the end of my parents' lane from a payphone in Cleveland once, and I let it ring 22 times, and no one picked up. And I sat on the curb afterward and cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. I saw my mother once, 6 months later, across the parking lot of a fabric store in Middlefield. She saw me. I know she saw me. Her face did not change. She turned and she walked back to her buggy, and she did not look up again, and that was the last time I have seen my mother's face. My father, I am told, refers to me in the past tense. My sisters cross the street when they see me in town. The click of the receiver, 22 rings into silence, is a sound I still hear at night sometimes, the way other people hear ocean waves. I want to talk about the woman who taught me the words for what had happened to me, because I would not be sitting here without her. Her name was Dr. Margaret. She was an Englishwoman, very small, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a beige office full of plants she watered herself, and she was patient in a way I had not known a person could be patient. She did not flinch when I told her things. She did not look away. She did not tell me what to feel. She gave me language, slowly, the way you feed soup to someone who has not eaten in a long time. She taught me the phrase coercive control, and I sat in her office the day she said it, and I cried for 40 minutes because I had been looking for that phrase my whole life and had not known it existed. She taught me bodily autonomy. She taught me that consent is not consent when the cost of saying no has been made unbearable. She taught me that emotional withdrawal is a form of punishment, and that punishment delivered by a whole community at once is not discipline, it is coercion. She said to me once, very quietly, looking at her hands, "Hannah, the most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love." And I went home that night, and I sat in my small apartment with the lamp on, and I thought about my mother's hand briefly on top of mine at the kitchen table, and the way the warmth had returned to my house after Rebecca's tea. And I understood that I had been loved, and that I had been controlled, and that those two things had been the same thing for 25 years, and that telling them apart was going to be the work of my life. I want to be careful here because I am almost done, and the place where I want to leave you matters to me. My husband was not a monster. The bishop was not a monster. My mother was not a monster. They were people raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, doing the only thing they had been taught to do with a woman whose no had begun to take up too much room. The system is the thing, not the people. I do not hate the Amish. The Amish gave me a work ethic that has carried me through every job I have ever held. They gave me hands that know how to do almost anything. They gave me a faith that I have had to take apart and put back together, but that is still, somewhere underneath everything, mine. They gave me sisters whose voices I still hear when I am baking, and a mother whose recipes are in my hands without my having to think about them, and a childhood of cold mornings and warm kitchens and the smell of bread that I would not trade for any other childhood, even now. The framework was the mistake, not the people. I have to keep saying that until I believe it all the way down, because some days I still don't. I want to say one more thing before I go. If you grew up in a place where your body was not your own, I see you. If you ever lay in the dark beside someone and said yes because you were too tired to survive what no would cost you, I see you. If you ever counted, in secret, the small refusals you swallowed at the dinner table, and counted them again the next day, and the next, until the counting became a second pulse inside you, I see you. If you have ever watched a daughter lower her eyes the way you lowered yours and felt something in your chest break open, I see you. If you ever stood at a window and watched a frost finish what the night before had only threatened, and felt the same thing happen inside your own body, I see you. If you were ever told that being a good woman meant making yourself smaller until there was nothing left of you to refuse with, I see you. You were not weak. You were surviving inside a system that was built to make sure you could not refuse without paying for it. The fact that you are sitting in your kitchen tonight, in whatever kitchen you are sitting in, listening to a woman you have never met talk about a county you have never been to, and feeling something in you sit up the way something in me sat up at Rebecca's quilting frame, that is the part of you that never stopped speaking. That is the part of you that was waiting for the language. That is the part of you that is going to carry you out of whatever room you are still standing in. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you? Tell me where you were sitting when you noticed your own kitchen inside mine. Tell me your story if you are ready. I read every single one of them, and I sit with them a while before I close my computer at night. And the ones I cannot answer, I carry into the next morning. If you want more of these, please subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much more I have not yet said, and I am only beginning to find the words for some of it. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was.